I was supposed to retire with a handshake and a gold watch. Instead, they handed me a termination letter 30 minutes before my farewell speech. They thought that was the end of my story, but it was only the beginning. I woke up that morning with a strange sense of peace. After 38 years of working at Wilburn Tech, the day had finally come, my last one. I was officially retiring. The company had become like a second home to me. I started as a junior technician, worked my way up through every department, and ended up running the operations team. I gave everything I had, missed birthdays, worked weekends, traveled across the country, all because I believed in the company, in its people, and in its future. As I shaved in the mirror, I caught myself smiling. My wife had already prepared a small surprise breakfast with my favorite blueberry pancakes and a card that said, "Happy retirement, my hero." She'd been waiting for this day even more than I had. When I arrived at the office, everything felt surreal. People clapped as I walked in. A few even stood to hug me, others patted my back. There were balloons tied near my desk, a big sheet cake in the break room with "Thank you, Martin" written in blue frosting. The HR rep had scheduled a 4 p.m. farewell gathering where I was supposed to give a short speech and get my retirement plaque. I kept glancing at the clock all morning. My team had planned a dinner afterward, and my daughter was flying in that evening. I couldn't help but feel proud. I wasn't a flashy guy, but I'd built systems that saved millions, mentored dozens of employees, and kept things running through every crisis. Around 2:30 p.m., I took a moment alone in the server room, just to breathe it all in. I touched the cabinet doors like I was saying goodbye to old friends. I never thought it would feel this hard to let go, but at least I was going out with dignity, or so I believed. When I walked back into my office, 2 men from upper management were waiting for me. Their faces were tight, unreadable. "Martin, can we have a quick word?" Something in their tone shifted the air. My heart paused, but only for a second. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything I thought I'd earned would be stripped away. "Of course," I said, trying to hide the sudden tightness in my chest. I walked into my office and shut the door behind me. The 2 men, Doug from HR and Trevor, the new VP of Finance, didn't sit down. That was my first clue something wasn't right. Doug cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. "Martin, I'll get straight to it. After a recent internal review, upper management has decided to move in a new direction. Effective immediately, your position is being eliminated." I blinked. "Wait, what?" Trevor stepped in quickly, like he was trying to control the damage. "This isn't personal. It's part of a broader cost restructuring strategy. You'll be compensated with a severance package, of course, but the official classification will be early termination, not retirement." My ears rang. The words didn't make sense. Early termination. I was supposed to retire in less than 2 hours. I laughed, though it came out hollow. "You mean I'm not retiring?" Trevor avoided my eyes. "Technically, no. Your termination becomes effective immediately. We'll cancel the farewell gathering, and you'll need to return your badge and access credentials by the end of the day." Doug handed me an envelope. I didn't open it. My hands were cold. I stared at them both. "I gave you nearly 4 decades of my life. You couldn't even wait until 5 p.m. Doug looked away. Trevor just adjusted his cuffs and said, "It's been decided. I'm sorry, Martin." It was over just like that. No speech, no cake, no thank you. I walked out of my office to find the balloons gone. The cake gone. Someone had already pulled down the sign. I stood there in silence as coworkers avoided eye contact, some whispering behind cubicle walls. The very same people who cheered me that morning now looked the other way. When I got home, my wife knew something was wrong before I even said a word. I dropped the envelope on the kitchen table and sat down in silence. "Martin," she whispered. I shook my head, staring at the floor. "They didn't let me retire, they fired me." Her hand covered her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. I didn't cry, not yet. I was still too stunned to feel the full weight of it. But deep inside, something started to break. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, my wife softly breathing beside me. The silence in the room felt heavy, like it had weight. At one point, I got up and walked into the kitchen, sat at the table, and just stared at the severance envelope for what felt like hours. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The only thing I cared about had already been taken. For the first time in years, I didn't know who I was anymore. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to answer calls or messages. A few old coworkers texted things like, "So sorry, Martin," or "That was cold, man." But most said nothing at all. My daughter arrived from the airport expecting a retirement dinner and found me in sweatpants, unshaven, sitting on the couch like a ghost. "Dad, what happened?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. When I finally told her, she looked at me the same way you look at someone who's been mugged in broad daylight, shocked, helpless, angry for them, but unsure what to do. Over the next few days, the shame set in. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because it felt like I didn't matter. 38 years and they erased me in less than 10 minutes. No party, no thank you, just deleted. People always talk about retirement like it's a finish line, a celebration. Mine felt more like being thrown out of my own house with the door slammed shut behind me. I avoided friends. I skipped church. I kept telling my wife I was fine, but I know she didn't believe me. I saw the way she looked at me when I sat in silence for hours, not even turning on the TV. She cooked meals I barely touched. Her worry filled the air between us, but I couldn't give her anything back. I felt like an old dog that had been kicked out of the yard. One night, I found myself sitting in the garage, flipping through an old photo album from company events. Smiling faces, team-building retreats, holiday parties. My hand trembled as I closed it. Everything I had built, everything I had given, meant nothing to them. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. First, I had to feel the full weight of being forgotten. A week passed, then two. I still hadn't opened the severance envelope. It sat on the kitchen counter like a reminder I didn't ask for, too heavy to throw away, too painful to touch. My wife gently nudged me one afternoon. "Martin, you can't stay in this fog forever." I knew she was right, but I didn't know how to start moving again. That part of me, the part that had purpose, was buried somewhere deep, and I wasn't sure I could find it again. That changed on a Wednesday morning. I got a call from Tom, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. We started at Wilburn Tech around the same time, but he'd left 15 years ago to start his own consulting firm. We caught up for a few minutes before he got quiet and said, "I heard what happened. I'm sorry, man. You didn't deserve that." I didn't know how to respond, so I just let the silence sit. But then he said something that stuck with me. "You do realize why they fired you, right? It had nothing to do with performance." "What do you mean?" "I've seen this before. You were probably too close to collecting full retirement benefits. Firing you saved them money. It's all about the bottom line now. Loyalty means nothing to these new execs." My stomach twisted. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it from someone else, it hit differently. There was a numbness, and then a slow burn starting to build in my chest. "They threw away the best person they had," he said. "If I were you, I'd make Em regret it." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The rage I'd been keeping buried started to stir, not just rage at what they did, but at myself for letting them do it without a fight. Later that evening, while mindlessly scrolling online, I came across an article about a small company, Lexer Systems, a struggling competitor of Wilburn Tech. I'd heard of them before, once even consulted on a project they botched. The article mentioned they were looking for outside investment and leadership with vision. I stared at the screen. Something lit up inside me, just a flicker, barely a spark. But it was the first time since that day I felt alive. I couldn't stop thinking about that article. Lexer Systems, small, outdated, struggling to stay afloat. But it had something Wilburn Tech had lost, potential. And more importantly, it had a soul. I remembered meeting a few of their engineers years ago, passionate, idealistic people drowning under poor leadership. All they needed was direction. And I needed a reason to get out of bed again. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a notepad. My wife walked in, eyebrows raised. "You're working on something." I nodded slowly, "Maybe." For the next few days, I lived in spreadsheets, market reports, and financial statements. I read everything I could about Lexer, its history, current leadership, technology pipeline, client list. It was worse than I thought. Their books were bleeding. Their CEO had resigned 3 months earlier, but beneath the chaos, I saw something others didn't. Opportunity. I called Tom again. "You know anyone over at Lexer?" He chuckled. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." He gave me a name, an old colleague-turned-advisor who knew Lexer's current board. The next day, I was on the phone setting up a meeting. They were skeptical at first. Why would a recently fired retiree want anything to do with their sinking ship? I told them the truth. I didn't want to run away from what happened to me. I wanted to turn it into something better. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking to build something that mattered. The next challenge was funding. I had savings, of course, enough to live comfortably in retirement, but not enough to turn Lexer around. That's where it got risky. I pitched the plan to a few old contacts, people I trusted, former colleagues, friends from the industry. Some hesitated, but a few listened. One of them, a quiet investor I'd helped years ago during a merger crisis, said, "If you're leading it, I'm in." By the end of the month, I'd pulled together a modest investment group, enough for a controlling share and the start of a real turnaround. It wasn't just about the money. It was about proving that the years I gave to Wilburn Tech meant something, that I still had something left in me. I looked at my wife one night and said, "I'm not done, not yet." She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, I saw pride in her eyes again. Walking into Lexer's modest office for the first time was like stepping into a time capsule. Outdated monitors, flickering lights, a coffee machine older than some of the engineers. A few heads looked up as I entered, eyes filled with confusion more than curiosity. These weren't people used to seeing a CEO type, and I didn't feel like one. "Hi, I'm Martin," I said, offering my hand around the room. No titles, no ego, just a man with a second chance. The first few weeks were rough. The staff was cautious, skeptical. Some had already been through 2 leadership changes in the past year and didn't expect much from me either. I didn't blame them. Trust isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. So I listened. I sat with the engineers, the junior techs, even the receptionist. I asked questions, took notes, stayed late, brought coffee. I wanted them to know that I wasn't here to give orders, I was here to build something with them. Slowly, something shifted. I saw shoulders loosen, conversations open up, ideas come out. We started identifying Lexer's strengths: niche software, a few loyal but underserved clients, and some incredibly bright minds who had been ignored too long. I cut dead weight, renegotiated bad contracts, and restructured the development pipeline to focus on one core product we could actually deliver, and deliver well. The office started to come alive. Whiteboards filled up again. Laughter returned to the lunchroom. People started staying late not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One afternoon, I stood by the window, watching a small team huddle over a prototype with genuine excitement. And for a moment, I realized I wasn't thinking about Wilburn Tech at all. I was building something new, something of my own. There were still sleepless nights and tough decisions. Some days I doubted myself, but each time I walked through those Lexer doors, I remembered the man they tried to erase, the one they thought was finished. They were wrong. I was just getting started. It wasn't long before Wilburn Tech noticed what we were doing. At first, I thought they wouldn't care. After all, Lexer had been a small player in the market, barely worth a glance. But as our sales grew and our reputation started to rise, the messages began. I got a call from an old colleague who still worked at Wilburn. His voice was cautious. "Martin, things are shaking over here. People are talking. They know you're behind Lexer's comeback." I laughed a bit bitterly. "Good." He hesitated, then said, "Be careful. The company doesn't take kindly to competition, especially from you." I thought about those last moments at Wilburn, the cold dismissal, the erased retirement. The sting was still fresh, but now it felt different. Instead of pain, I felt purpose. The more Lexer grew, the more we proved. Clients who'd once signed long-term contracts with Wilburn started asking questions. Our engineers were innovators, eager and energized. Slowly, former Wilburn employees reached out, curious about joining our team. The industry was watching, and so was my old company. One afternoon, I received an official letter from Wilburn's legal department, cease and desist on a contract we just won. It was a warning, thinly veiled but clear. I sat back in my chair, fingers steepled, thinking of all the times I'd fought fires at Wilburn. Now I was fighting a different kind of battle. This wasn't about old grudges, it was about respect. I realized I wasn't just competing against a company. I was confronting the system that tried to discard me. It was scary, it was exhilarating. And I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror and saw a man who refused to be broken. The legal threats were just the beginning. Wilburn wasn't about to watch me rewrite the playbook without pushing back hard. But this time, I wasn't alone or powerless. I had a team who believed in the mission, investors who had faith, and years of experience I wasn't afraid to use. We tightened our contracts, doubled down on customer service, and poured every ounce of energy into innovation. The Lexer engineers, once overlooked and undervalued, suddenly had the freedom to create. And they did, bringing to life products Wilburn's bloated bureaucracy had killed long ago. The market noticed. Quarter by quarter, Lexer's revenue grew while Wilburn's began to slip. Rumors circulated in industry circles. Wilburn's losing its edge. Lexer's comeback is real. The news hit me like a wave, vindication mixed with cautious pride. One evening, I sat with my wife, the glow of the laptop screen lighting our faces. I was reading through client feedback, glowing testimonials, and the latest sales numbers. I told her quietly, "We're actually doing this." She smiled, eyes shining. "You never lost yourself, you just needed a new fight." But the fight wasn't over. Wilburn struck back again with a surprise offer, a buyout proposal for Lexer. It was tempting. I could have cashed out, walked away with a comfortable nest egg, but I refused. I looked at the team, the work we'd done, and the future we were building. I shook my head. No, this is bigger than money. It's about respect, legacy, and proving that people matter more than profits. The tables had turned. The boy they'd thrown out was now standing at the head of the table, and Wilburn was the one left scrambling to keep up. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Months passed, and Lexer wasn't just a company anymore. It was a community. We weren't perfect, but we were honest, transparent, and driven by a shared purpose. Every success felt like a personal victory, every challenge an opportunity to prove what real leadership looked like. I thought back to that final day at Wilburn, the shock, the betrayal, the loneliness. It hurt, no doubt. But it also sparked something inside me I hadn't realized was missing, belief in myself, not just as an employee, but as a leader. I rebuilt not only a company, but a version of myself I was proud of. At a company event, looking out at faces filled with hope and determination, I caught my wife's eye. She smiled, a mix of pride and relief. I smiled back, knowing this journey wasn't just mine, it was ours. I reached out to some old Wilburn colleagues who had quietly supported me and offered them roles at Lexer. It wasn't about revenge. It was about giving people a place where they mattered. One day, I received a message from the former CEO of Wilburn. He admitted the mistake they made and wished me well. I didn't respond right away. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but I was learning that moving forward meant letting go of bitterness. I was no longer the man who got fired on his last day. I was the man who took control of his story and turned it into something greater. Standing on the stage at Lexer's 10th anniversary celebration, I looked out over the crowd. Employees, investors, family, and friends who had been part of this incredible journey. The room was filled with warmth, laughter, and hope. It was a far cry from the cold silence of that final day at Wilburn Tech. I cleared my throat and took a deep breath. When I was fired the day I thought I was retiring, I felt lost, like everything I had built was suddenly meaningless. But that moment, painful as it was, became my turning point. The audience listened quietly, many nodding, some with tears in their eyes. I didn't just start a new company. I found a new purpose. I built a family, a community, and a legacy that I'm proud of, one where people matter, where loyalty is rewarded, and where we all grow together. After the speech, my wife squeezed my hand. "You didn't just change companies, Martin. You changed lives, including your own." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words deep in my chest. Looking back, I realized that being fired wasn't the end. It was a brutal push to rewrite my story on my own terms. Now, when people ask me about retirement, I tell them it's not a finish line, it's a new beginning. And this time, I get to choose how the story goes.